The desert sun hung low, painting the cracked asphalt in shades of rust and gold, as if the earth itself were bleeding out the day's heat. A lone roadside chapel squatted off the highway like a forgotten relic, its white adobe walls scarred by wind and time, a wooden cross tilting against the relentless sky. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners, broken only by the flicker of a single candle on the altar. There, huddled on a worn pew, sat Eliza Moore, 8 years old, her small frame trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her dark curls were matted with dust, her dress torn at the hem, and her eyes, wide, haunted pools of fear, darted toward the door every few seconds. She clutched something tight in her fist, knuckles white, as if it were the only anchor keeping her from drifting into the void. No one had come for her. Hours had passed since the bus dropped her off with a stranger's note and a vague promise of safety. But the chapel was empty, echoing with the distant howl of wind through the scrub brush outside. The door creaked open, letting in a shaft of blinding light, and Eliza flinched, curling tighter into herself. Heavy boots thudded against the stone floor, deliberate and unhurried, the scent of leather and engine oil cutting through the stale air of incense. Jack, Iron Fulton, stepped inside, his broad shoulders filling the frame, the iron promise patch on his leather vest catching the dim glow. At 48, Jack was a map of hard miles, silver threading his beard, a jagged scar pulling at the corner of his eye, remnants of a life spent chasing horizons on 2 wheels. He wasn't looking for ghosts today. He'd pulled off the highway to stretch his legs, to let the quiet of the chapel wash away the roar of his Harley still humming in his ears. But something in the girl's posture stopped him cold, a fragility that tugged at the buried parts of him, the ones he'd armored over with years of riding solo. He paused, helmet tucked under one arm, the faint jingle of keys in his pocket, the only sound breaking the silence. "Hey, kid," he said, voice low and gravelly, like tires on loose gravel. "You all right? This place ain't exactly a playground." Eliza lifted her head slowly, tears carving clean tracks through the grime on her cheeks. She didn't speak at first, just stared at him with an intensity that made Jack's chest tighten. Then, with a trembling hand, she uncurled her fingers, revealing a small medallion dangling from a thin chain. It was tarnished silver, no bigger than a quarter, but the engraving caught the candlelight, a face, young and unlined, staring back with fierce determination. Jack's face, from 20 years ago, before the scars, before the wars that had carved him hollow. His breath hitched, the world narrowing to that tiny piece of metal. He knelt slowly, the knees of his jeans whispering against the floor, close enough to smell the faint sweetness of her shampoo mixed with fierce sweat. "Where'd you get that?" he murmured, reaching out but not touching, his calloused fingers hovering. Eliza's voice came out in a whisper, fragile as cracked glass. "My mommy said it's from a man who saves people. She said if I ever needed help, I'd show it to someone who looks like him. You. You look like him." Jack's mind reeled back, unbidden, to a dust-choked afternoon in the Nevada Badlands. A woman's car had broken down, stranded with her infant in the blistering heat. He'd stopped, fixed the engine with parts from his bike, shared his water. In gratitude, she'd pressed something into his hand, a token from her own past. But no, wait. It was him who'd given her this medallion, pulled from his neck on impulse. "This means something," he'd told her, voice rough with the weight of old oaths. "If you ever need me, find the iron promise. We'll come." He'd meant it then, in the fire of that moment, but life had pulled him away. Missions, losses, the slow erosion of promises into regrets. Now here it was, staring back at him like a judgment. Eliza's lower lip quivered. "Mommy's gone. They took her, and I don't know why. She told me to wait here to find help." Jack's jaw clenched, the familiar coil of anger stirring in his gut. Not the hot rage of youth, but a cold resolve forged in too many dawns alone. He glanced toward the chapel window, where his bike gleamed under the fading sun, a black stallion ready to ride into the fray. Gently, he closed her hand around the medallion. "I'm Jack, and that promise, it ain't dead yet." In that instant, as her small fingers gripped his, something shifted in the air between them. A spark, fragile but unyielding, hinting at roads untaken and bonds reforged. The biker who had ridden away from his word now felt its pull, stronger than any chain, drawing him back into the storm. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the chapel's shutters like impatient knuckles. Jack stood, lifting Eliza effortlessly onto his hip, her weight light as a secret. She didn't protest, just nestled against his vest, the medallion cool against his chest where he'd tucked it. As they stepped into the twilight, the desert stretched endless before them, a canvas of shadows and whispers. Jack's mind raced ahead. Who was this woman from his past? Why had she vanished, leaving her daughter with a relic of forgotten honor? He fired up the Harley, the engine's growl a thunderous vow, and eased onto the highway with Eliza secure behind him, her arms wrapped tight. The road blurred into night, but for the first time in years, Jack didn't feel the loneliness of the ride. This was a beginning, raw and uncharted, a promise deferred, clawing its way back to life. The next morning broke sharp and clear, the sun slicing through the motel curtains like a blade. Jack had ridden through the night to a dusty town called Redstone, holing up in a room that smelled of faded dreams and cheap coffee. Eliza slept fitfully on the bed, her medallion now on the nightstand, a sentinel in the dawn light. He stepped out onto the balcony, phone in hand, dialing an old number from his Iron Promise days. "Hawk, it's Iron. Need you to dig on a name. Moore. Disappeared after stirring trouble at some transport outfit. Got a kid here holding the key." On the other end, Tom Hawk Daniels' voice crackled with the same steady fire that had bound their crew through fire and fallout. "On it, brother. Promises like that don't fade. They just wait." By noon, the first threads unraveled. Eliza's mother, Lena Moore, had been a whistleblower at Frontier Haulage, a private firm shuttling cargo through the back roads. Manifests doctored, payoffs hushed under the table. Lena had reported the irregularities, voices in the dark promising protection that never came. Then, silence. Her car found abandoned near the chapel. Traces of a struggle in the scattered papers, but no body, no answers. Jack's scar itched as he pieced it together, the medallion burning a hole in his pocket. He'd abandoned that oath once, let the miles bury it. But now, with Eliza's trusting eyes on him, he saw the cost of silence. The Iron Promise would ride again, not for glory, but for the quiet justice of a word kept late. As the day wore on, Jack gathered his crew via encrypted calls, voices overlapping like engines in convoy. Old wounds reopened, but so did loyalties, veterans who'd shared foxholes, brothers who'd inked the promise on their souls. They met at a roadside diner, the air thick with the sizzle of burgers and unspoken resolve. Eliza sat beside Jack, nibbling fries, her fear easing into cautious wonder. "Will you find her?" she asked, voice small but steady. Jack met her gaze, the weight of 20 years in his nod. "Yeah, kid. We're just getting started." The diner's neon sign buzzed faintly against the afternoon haze, casting erratic red glows across the cracked linoleum floor. Steam rose from the grill like ghosts from old battles, mingling with the sharp tang of frying onions and the undercurrent of motor oil clinging to the bikers' jackets. Jack leaned back in the booth, his massive frame dwarfing the vinyl seat, one hand absently tracing the edge of a coffee mug stained with too many refills. Across from him, Eliza picked at her fries, her small legs swinging just above the floor, the medallion now tucked safely inside her collar. The crew had filtered in one by one, shadows materializing from the parking lot where their Harleys stood in a vigilant line, engines cooling with soft ticks. Tom Hawk Daniels slid into the booth first. his weathered face splitting into a grim smile under the brim of his faded cap. At 52, Hawk was the strategist, the one who'd mapped their runs through war zones and back-alley deals, his eyes sharp as shrapnel. Beside him came Riley Ghost Harlan, a wiry veteran with tattoos snaking up his arms like forgotten rivers, and Maria Forge Reyes, the only woman in their core circle, her nurse's precision honed from patching up brothers after too many close calls. They weren't just riders. They were the iron promise incarnate, bonds forged in the crucible of loss, oaths whispered over campfires that outlasted the flames. Hawk spread a crumpled napkin on the table, sketching rough lines with a pen scavenged from the counter. "Frontier haulage ain't your average truckers," he said, voice a low rumble that cut through the diner's hum. "They're moving more than cargo. Whispers of rerouted shipments, stuff that shouldn't see daylight. Lena Moore filed her report 3 weeks back, flagged manifests that didn't add up. Next thing, her office line goes dead, and she's ghosted." He tapped the napkin, marking a spot near the chapel. "Cars impounded in Redstone PD's lot. No prints but the dash cam footage. Scrambled like someone knew to hit it first." Jack's fingers tightened around the mug, the ceramic warm against his palm. He could still feel the medallion's weight in his pocket, a talisman dragging him back to that desert afternoon. Lena's face flickered in his memory now, tired eyes, a grateful smile as she'd cradled her baby, the engine he'd jury-rigged purring back to life. He'd handed her the medallion without a second thought, the silver warm from his skin. "This is my word," he'd growled, the promise slipping out like a vow to the horizon. "Iron promise. We ride for those who can't." But he'd ridden on, chasing the next fight, the next scar. Now that echo had found him, carried by a child's trembling hand. Eliza looked up, her fry forgotten. "Mommy said the trucks were bad. They took things that weren't theirs." Her words hung in the air, simple as a stone dropped in still water, rippling through the group. Forge reached over, her calloused hand gentle on the girl's shoulder. "Sounds like she was brave, kiddo, braver than most." As a former ER nurse turned rider, Forge had seen the underbelly of small-town justice, patience vanishing after speaking out, files buried under red tape. She exchanged a glance with Jack, her dark eyes steady. "If Lena's onto falsified logs, we're talking payoffs to badges. Quiet ones, the kind that keep mouths shut." The waitress swung by, refilling coffees with a clatter that masked the tension coiling tighter. Outside, a semi rumbled past on the highway, its shadow fleeting across the window like a warning. Ghost leaned in, his voice a whisper honed from stakeouts. "I tailed a couple of their rigs last night. They detour off-grid, swap plates in the scrub. One driver I cornered spilled about a clean-up crew, hired muscle for loose ends. Lena might have gotten too close." He paused, rubbing the faded ink on his forearm, a promise etched in script. "We ride as one. Question is, Iron, you sure you want to drag us into this? Last time we chased shadows, we lost too much." Jack's scar pulled taut as he met Ghost's gaze, the diner's fluorescent lights carving hollows under his eyes. The crew knew his history, the missions that had splintered him, the brother left behind in a hail of dust and regret. He'd walked away from the promise years ago, trading brotherhood for solitary miles, convinced a lone wolf healed faster. But Eliza's presence beside him, her quiet trust like a fragile flame, cracked that armor. "That medallion's my chain," he said finally, voice steady as an idling engine. Lena held on to it. Means she believed. "I owe her, and this kid more than ghosts." Nods rippled around the table, unspoken oaths renewing in the steam and sizzle. As the sun dipped lower, painting the lot in fiery streaks, they mapped their move. Hawk would hit the records office in Redstone, forge the hospital logs for any trace of Lena post-disappearance. Ghost and a few others would shadow the haulage yard at dusk, eyes on the manifests. Jack would take Eliza to a safe house run by an old ally, a mechanic with a garage full of hidden compartments and hot leads. But as they rose to leave, a shadow fell across the booth, a local cop, badge glinting, sauntering in with the casual swagger of authority. "Heard you boys are asking questions," he drawled, thumb hooked in his belt. "Best stick to the road. Some roads lead to dead ends." The air thickened, the crew's postures shifting like wolves scenting a threat. Jack stood slowly, towering over the uniform, his presence a wall of leather and resolve. "We're just passing through," he replied, even as his mind raced, corruption's first whisper testing the line. The cop's eyes flicked to Eliza, lingering a beat too long, before he shrugged and turned away. But Jack caught the flicker of unease, the moral rot beneath the star. Outside, as they mounted up, engines roaring to life in unison, Eliza clung to his back, the wind whipping her curls. The convoy peeled out, dust swirling like a vow unleashed, heading into the gathering dusk. Promises deferred had a way of demanding payment, and Jack felt the pull stronger now, a thread weaving him back to honor 1 mile at a time. The safe house loomed on the town's edge, a squat bungalow camouflaged by overgrown mesquite, its porch light a beacon in the twilight. Inside, the air smelled of grease and fresh-baked cornbread, courtesy of Silas, the mechanic who'd once pulled Jack from a wreck with nothing but grit and a torque wrench. Eliza settled on a threadbare couch, eyes heavy but watchful, as Jack paced the kitchen, phone buzzing with Hawk's update, a falsified manifest linking haulage to shadowed deals, Lena's name circled in red. The pieces were aligning, a puzzle of betrayal pieced by loyalty's hand. For the first time, the road ahead didn't feel empty. It thrummed with purpose, a redemption etched in chrome and resolve. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The garage lights hummed like distant thunder, casting long shadows across Silas's workbench, cluttered with rusted tools and half-rebuilt carburetors. The safe house's back room doubled as his domain, a sanctuary of oil stains and flickering fluorescence where secrets were as common as spare parts. Jack leaned against a scarred metal cabinet, arms crossed over his chest. The medallion's chain now looped around his wrist like a makeshift bracelet, a constant reminder pulsing against his skin. Eliza had dozed off in the adjoining room, her breathing steady through the thin wall, lulled by the rhythmic clank of Silas tuning a vintage engine. But sleep eluded Jack. The day's revelations churned in his gut, a storm brewing behind his scarred features. Silas wiped his hands on a rag blackened with grease, his face a roadmap of crow's feet from years squinting at horizons. At 60, he was the quiet anchor of the Iron Promise's outer circle, a man who'd traded his own bike for a wrench after a crash that left him walking with a limp. "Hawk's feed just came through," he said, sliding a tablet across the bench. The screen glowed with scanned documents, manifests from frontier haulage, dates blurred but patterns sharp. Columns of cargo listed as agricultural supplies rerouted to unmarked depots, weights mismatched like lies told too often. Lena Moore's signature slashed across one, a bold query in the margins. Discrepancy noted. Request audit. She wasn't just poking, she was digging deep. Looks like they buried her report under a stack of approvals from the county clerk. Jack scrolled through the files, the tablet's cool glass a stark contrast to the heat rising in his chest. Each entry whispered of corruption's slow seep, quiet payoffs to inspectors, drivers vanishing after long hauls, routes veering into the desert's forgotten veins. Lena had been the spark, her whistleblower claim filed in a nondescript office that now stood empty, its door padlocked with fresh chains. He remembered her now in fragments, the way her hands had trembled as she accepted the medallion, the infant, Eliza, cooing in a makeshift sling from a blanket. "Keep this safe," he'd told her, the words heavy with the promise of his youth. Iron promise, rides for the stranded. But he'd vanished into the miles, leaving her to face the world's undercurrents alone. The guilt twisted like a loose chain, but so did resolve, a fire kindled by Eliza's unyielding faith. A low rumble outside shattered the quiet. Headlights pierced the garage's grimy windows, sweeping across the concrete like searchlights. Silas killed the lights, plunging them into near darkness, the only glow from the tablet's screen etching their faces in blue. "That's Ghost," Jack murmured, recognizing the cadence of the approaching bike. Moments later, the side door creaked open, and Riley, Ghost Harlan, slipped in, his lean frame taut as a bowstring. Dust clung to his boots, and a faint bruise bloomed on his jaw, the mark of a scuffle kept quiet. He carried a battered envelope, seals broken, contents spilling slightly, photographs and a thumb drive. "Haulage yard was a hornet's nest at dusk," Ghost said, voice hushed but edged with urgency. He dropped into a stool, the metal groaning under him. "Guards thicker than usual, floodlights sweeping like they expect company. Snuck a maintenance access, found these in a lockbox by the office." He tapped the photos. Grainy shots of ledger pages, names crossed out, payments funneled through shell accounts. One image caught Jack's eye, a surveillance still of Lena, time-stamped weeks ago, arguing with a suited figure at the yard's gate. Her posture was defiant, shoulders squared, but shadows lurked in the frame, watching eyes from the rigs. She confronted the foreman that night. Witnesses say he laughed it off, but the next morning her desk was cleared. No one's seen her since. Silas brewed coffee in a dented pot, the aroma bitter and grounding, as Ghost plugged the drive into the tablet. Files bloomed, audio clips, muffled voices haggling over discreet transport of unmarked crates, coordinates pointing to abandoned mine shafts in the Badlands. No overt threats, but the subtext screamed. Lena had uncovered a vein of illicit flow, cargo that greased palms from truckers to town hall. Jack's mind raced, piecing the moral labyrinth, justice twisted into knots by those sworn to uphold it. The cop at the diner flashed in his thoughts, that lingering gaze on Eliza, a probe testing for weakness. "They're covering tracks," Jack growled, the words scraping out like gravel. "But why take her? A missing whistleblower's just noise, unless she's got proof." Ghost rubbed his jaw, wincing slightly. "One of the drivers cracked when I cornered him, off the record, away from the lights, said Lena left a flash drive in his cab, hidden in the dash. Begged him to mail it if anything happened. He didn't. Fears a hell of a muzzle. But get this, the cleanup crew I mentioned, they're not locals. Hired from out east, badges that don't shine right, corrupt threads running deep." The air grew heavier, the garage's confines closing in like the weight of deferred oaths. Jack thought of his own fractures. The war buddy lost to a betrayal he'd failed to see, the promise splintering under regrets. Stepping back in meant risking the crew, dredging up ghosts they'd buried. Yet Eliza's medallion dangled from his wrist, cool silver warming with his pulse, a beacon pulling him forward. Silas broke the silence, pouring mugs with steady hands. "You know what this means, Iron. We're not just chasing a woman, we're unraveling a web. One wrong tug and it all comes down, on her, on the kid, on us." His eyes met Jack's, brother to brother. The limp a testament to sacrifices past. Jack nodded, the decision settling like dust after a ride. "Then we tug smart. Hawks on the clerk, Forges cross-checking hospital intakes for any Jane Does matching Lena's description. We linked the drive's cords to her last known route, hit the mines at first light. Ghost pocketed the photos, a grim alliance sealing in the dim light. As midnight crept in, the garage fell quiet, save for the distant coyote calls, echoing the desert's loneliness. Jack slipped into the front room, where Eliza stirred on the couch, her small hand reaching out in sleep. He sat beside her, the medallion catching the moonlight filtering through cracked blinds. In her dreams, perhaps she saw her mother, strong, unbowed. Jack vowed silently that reality would match it. The iron promise wasn't a relic, it was a living code, loyalty's engine revving against corruption's tide. Tomorrow they'd ride deeper, honoring the promise that had waited 20 years, its redemption unfolding one shadowed mile at a time. Outside, the wind whispered through the mesquite, carrying the faint scent of rain on parched earth, a rare mercy in the Badlands. Jack's phone vibrated softly, a text from Hawk. Clerk's records show payoffs to PD. Lena's proof is key. Stay sharp. He pocketed it, resolve hardening like tempered steel. The web tightened, but so did their bond, a family chosen in the fire of necessity, weaving justice from threads of honor long frayed. As Eliza murmured in her sleep, Jack watched over her, the biker reborn in the quiet vigil, ready to face the dawn's unraveling truths. The first light of dawn crept over the Badlands like a hesitant thief, gilding the jagged mesas in pale gold and chasing shadows from the scrub. Jack's Harley idled low in the garage's mouth, its throaty purr vibrating through the concrete as the crew assembled in the chill air. Eliza stood beside him, bundled in one of Silas's oversized jackets, her eyes bright with a mix of trepidation and quiet determination. The medallion hung around her neck now, tucked against her chest like a shield. Ghost adjusted his gloves, the faint bruise on his jaw a purple shadow in the growing light, while Hawk checked the GPS coordinates on his battered phone. Abandoned mine shafts 10 miles out, where haulage's illicit routes converged like veins to a poisoned heart. Silas handed out thermoses of black coffee from the porch, steam curling like unspoken warnings. "Watched your backs last night. Nothing stirred but the wind," he said, his limp more pronounced in the cold. "But eyes are on you now? That cop from the diner, he's got friends in low places?" Jack nodded, the weight of the night settling in his bones. Sleep had come in fragments, haunted by Lena's defiant stance in those grainy photos, her voice echoing in his mind from a desert memory. A soft thank you, laced with the exhaustion of a single mother fighting invisible tides. He'd failed her once by riding away. Now, the promise demanded he steer straight into the storm. The convoy rolled out in formation, dust plumes trailing like banners of resolve. Jack led with Eliza secured in a sidecar rigged overnight, Silas's handiwork, padded with blankets and strapped tight. The road twisted through arroyos, the air sharp with sage and the metallic tang of dew on iron-rich soil. Hawk flanked left on his customized softail, forged to the right, her nursing kit lashed to the frame alongside a toolkit for whatever truths they'd unearth. Ghost brought up the rear, eyes scanning mirrors for tails. No words passed over the engine's roar, but the rhythm of their wheels spoke volumes, a symphony of loyalty, each mile a stitch mending old fractures. The mineshaft entrance loomed abruptly, a yawning scar in the earth framed by rusted timbers and chain-link fences sagging like weary sentinels. Abandoned decades ago, it had become a ghost of industry, wind moaning through its depths like a lament. They killed the engines a quarter-mile out, boots crunching on gravel as they approached on foot, the silence amplifying every snap of twig. Eliza stayed close to Jack, her small hand in his, the medallion's chain glinting faintly. "Is Mommy here?" she whispered, voice swallowed by the vastness. Jack squeezed her fingers gently. "Maybe not, kid, but clues are. And clues lead home." Hawk picked the gate's lock with practiced ease, the click echoing like a starting pistol. Inside, the ground sloped into shadow, littered with debris, discarded crates, faded warning signs peeling from posts. Forge swept her flashlight beam across the gloom, revealing fresh tire tracks in the dust, too recent for ghosts. "Haulage rigs," she murmured, kneeling to trace the treads. "Heavy load, single axle, matches the manifests." Deeper in, they found the vein. A concealed alcove where pallets of sealed boxes huddled against the wall, labels scrubbed but edges frayed, hinting at hurried concealment. Ghost pried one open with a crowbar from his pack, the wood splintering with a dry crack. Inside, not grain or tools but stacks of electronics, circuitry that screamed black market tech, rerouted from legitimate shipments. Jack's pulse quickened. The air thick with the musty scent of earth and deceit. This was Lena's proof, the irregularity she'd flagged. Cargo vanishing into shadows, funneled to buyers who paid in silence. But as he scanned the crates, a glint caught his eye. A woman's scarf, silk frayed at the edges, tangled in the corner. Blue, like the one Lena had worn in his memory, knotted around the baby's blanket. His hand closed around it, fabric soft and dust-caked, carrying a faint trace of lavender soap. "She was here," he said, voice rough as the mine's walls. Eliza reached for it, tears welling. "Mommy's scarf. She smells like home." The moment shattered with a distant crunch. Tires on gravel, engines growling to life beyond the gate. Hawk's radio crackled. "Inbound. 2 rigs. Armed shadows in the cabs. We got minutes." Adrenaline surged, the crew moving like a well-oiled machine. They grabbed samples, photos snapped, a drive snatched from a makeshift console hidden in the alcove, then melted back into the shadows. But as they retreated, a shot rang out wild and warning, ricocheting off stone. Eliza flinched against Jack, her cry muffled in his vest. He scooped her up, heart pounding not with fear, but the cold fury of a promise cornered. They burst into daylight, mounting up as the haulage trucks barreled through the gate, headlights blazing like accusatory eyes. No pursuit yet, just a standoff, drivers silhouetted against the rising sun, rifles glinting. Jack gunned the throttle, the sidecar bouncing over ruts, the convoy scattering into the maze of arroyos. Bullets whined past, kicking up dirt, but the iron promise rode as one. Evasive weaves, engines screaming defiance. Forge veered wide, drawing fire, while Ghost laid suppressive bursts from a flare gun, sparks blooming like false stars. Miles blurred into safety, the chase fading as the Badlands swallowed their trail. They regrouped at a forgotten overlook, breaths ragged. The scarf clutched in Jack's fist like a flag of unfinished business. Hawk pored over the photos, his face grim. This ties haulage to the payoffs. Cords match the drive's logs. Lena must have stashed more here, forced them to grab her. Forge bandaged a shallow graze on Ghost's arm, her touch steady. Hospital logs came back clean, no matches. But if she's alive, she's hidden deep. We need leverage. Eliza looked up at Jack, the medallion warm between her fingers. "You promised. You came back." Her words pierced deeper than any bullet, a child's faith igniting the embers of his redemption. Jack met the crew's eyes, the horizon stretching endless before them. Corruption's web quivered, but loyalty's thread held firm. The promise wasn't just words. It was this, riding through fire for the stranded, honoring oaths that time couldn't erase. As the sun climbed higher, casting their shadows long and united, Jack felt the shift. From lone rider to guardian, the medallions wait a badge of battles yet to win. Back at the safe house by midday, Silas patched the evidence into a secure line, whispers of the find rippling through the network. But the scarf burned in Jack's pocket, a tactile vow pulling him onward. Lena's fight had become theirs, a moral reckoning against the rot of quiet betrayals. The crew dispersed to tighten the noose, Hawk to the clerk's office for deeper digs, Forge to allies in the medical underground. Jack stayed with Eliza, teaching her to polish the medallion under the garage lights, her small hands mirroring his. In that simple act, bonds reforged, a family chosen in the crucible of pursuit. The day waned with tension coiling tighter, a storm front gathering on the western sky. Jack's phone buzzed, a lead from an old contact. Lena sighted near a border outpost under guard but breathing. Hope flickered, fragile as the scarf's threads. But so did danger. The clean-up crew was mobilizing, corruption's hounds unleashed. As dusk painted the mesquite in bruised purples, Jack stood on the porch, Eliza asleep inside, the wind carrying echoes of engines on the horizon. The promise demanded more than miles now. It called for sacrifice, the quiet courage to stand against the tide. And Jack, scarred but unbowed, was ready to answer. If this chapter stirred something in you, hit that like button below. It helps these stories reach more roads. The border outpost squatted on the edge of nowhere, a cluster of prefab buildings ringed by razor wire and floodlights that pierced the encroaching night like accusatory fingers. Dust devils swirled in the arroyos beyond, carrying the faint whine of cicadas and the acrid bite of diesel exhaust from idling generators. Jack eased his Harley to a stop at the perimeter, the engine's rumble fading into the hush, leaving only the soft creak of cooling metal and Eliza's shallow breaths in the sidecar. The crew had split for this run, Hawk and Ghost circling wide to scout, Forge holding the safe house with Silas, ready to pull strings if lines crossed. Jack's hand rested on the medallion at Eliza's neck, its silver now polished to a gleam, a talisman against the shadows lengthening across the scrub. He'd ridden hard after the tip, the contact's voice gravelly over the encrypted line, sighted a woman matching Moore near the outpost clinic, bruised but walking, guarded by suits who don't flash badges. Udi, the words had ignited a spark in Jack's chest, chasing away the doubt that had gnawed since the mine shaft. Lena alive meant the promise wasn't just echoes, it was a lifeline, frayed but intact. But as he dismounted, boots sinking into the parched soil, caution coiled tight. The outpost wasn't neutral ground, rumors swirled of haulage's reach extending here. Payoffs greasing the wheels of border patrols, turning watchmen into wardens. Eliza stirred, rubbing her eyes with fists too small for the weight they carried. "Is this where Mommy is?" she asked, voice a whisper laced with hope's fragile edge. Jack knelt, the gravel biting through his jeans, and met her gaze. Those same haunted pools from the chapel, now flickering with the trust he'd earned, mile by mile. "Could be, kid, but we move quiet. Stay close." He lifted her out, her weight settling against his side like an anchor, the oversized jacket swallowing her frame. Together, they slipped toward the chain-link fence, shadows blending with the deepening dusk, the air cooling to carry the distant murmur of voices from the clinic's open windows. Hawk's signal came via a faint buzz in Jack's earpiece, a series of clicks confirming the all-clear on the east flank. Ghost had eyes on the guards, two men in unmarked jackets pacing the yard with the lazy vigilance of hired muscle, rifles slung low. No uniforms, no stars, just the quiet rot of corruption, the kind that thrived in border haze. Jack cut through the fence with bolt cutters from his pack, the snip muffled by a rag, sparks of severed wire glinting like fallen stars. They crept forward, the clinic's facade looming, peeling paint, a red cross faded to pink, the scent of antiseptic seeping out like a false promise of sanctuary. Inside, the hallway stretched dim and sterile, fluorescent strips buzzing overhead, casting harsh pools on linoleum scarred by years of hurried feet. A nurse at the desk glanced up, her face tightening at the sight of Jack's bulk and the child clinging to him, but recognition flickered, old ties from iron promise runs that had dropped supplies here unasked. "Fulton," she murmured, voice low as she slid a clipboard aside. "He's got eyes everywhere. Room 7, end of the hall. But if they catch wind—" She trailed off, jerking her chin toward a back exit. Jack nodded, the exchange wordless, a nod to loyalties that didn't need oaths. Room 7's door hung ajar, the interior bathed in the soft glow of a bedside lamp. Lena Moore lay propped on thin pillows, her frame gaunt under the blanket, dark hair matted and eyes ringed with exhaustion. Bandages wrapped her wrist, faint bruises shadowing her jaw, vestiges of a struggle that spoke without graphic detail. She looked up as Jack entered, Eliza breaking free to rush forward, small arms wrapping around her mother's neck in a sob that echoed the chapel's silence. "Mommy!" The word cracked the air, raw and real, pulling Jack back 20 years to that desert breakdown. Her grateful tears, the Medallion's transfer, the vow he'd let slip into regret. Lena's arms encircled Eliza, trembling but fierce, her gaze lifting to Jack with a mix of shock and dawning memory. "You!" The biker from the Badlands. Her voice was hoarse, threaded with pain, but unbowed, the same fire that had flagged those manifests. Jack stepped closer, closing the door softly, the room's confines amplifying the heartbeats, his steady thrum, Lena's ragged rhythm. "Iron Fulton, the Medallion brought me back. Your girl's been carrying it like a beacon." He pulled the scarf from his pocket, the blue silk unfolding like a banner of reunion, and her fingers brushed it, tears carving paths down her cheeks. She pulled Eliza tighter, glancing toward the window where night pressed in. "They grabbed me after the yard confrontation, thought I had the full proof. Recordings, ledgers, locked me here to detain under some fabricated hold, waiting for the cleanup to finish the job." Her words spilled in hushed urgency, painting the web. Haulage's foreman tipping off the crew, falsified reports to the outpost, claiming she was unstable, a threat to national roots. Quiet payoffs had sealed it. Clerks looking away, guards turning blind. But she'd hidden fragments, stashed in a clinic locker, enough to unravel the operation if it reached the right hands. Jack's scar itched, the old anger stirring, not blind rage, but the measured storm of justice deferred. "We hit the mine shaft, got samples, cords. Iron Promise is piecing it. Hawk's got the Clark's trail. Forge is lining up witnesses." He leaned in, voice a low anchor. "You're not alone anymore. That promise I made, it's holding." Lena's eyes searched his, seeing the scars, the silver in his beard, the man who'd ridden away but returned. "I kept it close, for her, for days like this." Eliza nestled between them, the Medallion catching the lamp's light, a bridge across lost years. But the reunion fractured with footsteps in the hall, heavy, deliberate, the guards' voices murmuring low. Hawk's click buzzed. "Company. Extract now." Jack scooped Eliza, Lena rising unsteadily, her arm over his shoulder for support. They moved as one, slipping through the back exit into the cooling night, the clinic's alarm, a distant wail swallowed by wind. The convoy waited in the scrub, engines idling like patient beasts. Lena mounted behind Jack, her grip tentative at first, then firm, the scarf tied around Eliza's neck like a vow renewed. As they peeled into the dark, bullets snapping from the outpost lights, the Badlands unfolded, a labyrinth of loyalty against pursuit. No kills, no chaos, just evasion, the Iron Promise weaving through arroyos, drawing the hounds off course. Miles later, at a hidden way station, they paused, breaths sinking in the quiet. Lena traced the Medallion, her touch lingering on Jack's younger engraving. "You came back late, but you came." The words hung, a moral absolution. Stirring the crew's silent nods, Hawk plotted the next push, deliver the proof to an uncorrupted judge, expose the payoff's chain. But danger lingered, the cleanup crew closing in, corruption's final lash. Eliza leaned against her mother, sleep claiming her at last, while Jack stood watch, the horizon a canvas of stars. Redemption wasn't a single ride. It was this, family reforged in crisis, promises blooming from buried seeds. The web trembled, justice's thread pulling taut, and for the first time, Jack felt the weight lift, honor's engine carrying them forward into the fray. The way station huddled in a fold of the Badlands, its weathered timbers blending with the night, like a secret kept by the earth. Flickering lantern lights spilled from narrow windows, casting wavering patterns on the packed dirt floor inside, where the air hung heavy with the scent of strong tea and engine grease. Jack eased Lena onto a creaking bench, her movements slow, each breath a measured victory against the ache in her ribs. Eliza curled against her side, the scarf draped over them both like a shared cloak, its blue threads a quiet testament to survival. The crew gathered in a loose circle, Hawk poring over maps spread on a scarred table, Ghost cleaning his rifle with methodical strokes, Forge checking Lena's bandages under the lantern's glow. Silas had radioed in from the safe house, his voice a steady anchor. Supplies en route, but whispers of roadblocks tightening the noose. Lena's eyes, shadowed but sharp, met Jack's across the room. The medallion rested between her fingers now, its engraving a mirror to the man before her, younger self staring back, unscarred by the miles. "I never thought it'd call you back," she said softly, the words weaving through the low murmur of the crew's planning. Jack leaned against the wall, arms crossed, the familiar coil of his leather vest creaking faintly. The ride from the outpost had been a blur of dust and dodged lights, but her weight against his back had grounded him, a reminder that promises weren't chains. They were lifelines. "Time has a way of circling," he replied, voice gravel rough, carrying the weight of 20 years. "Your girl kept it alive. That's more than I did." Eliza stirred, her small hand tracing the medallion's edge. "You both promised," she murmured, eyes half-lidded but trusting, bridging the gap between strangers turned kin. The innocence in her voice cut through the tension, a moral compass in the dim light, reminding them why they rode, not for vengeance, but for the quiet righting of wrongs. Forge finished her check, her touch gentle as she adjusted the sling on Lena's arm. "Bruises healing clean, but rest's your best medicine. We've got the proof bundled, photos, drive your stashed fragments, Hawks lining up a drop with a judge in the next county, one who hasn't bent to the payoffs." As a nurse who'd seen corruption swallow the vulnerable, Forge's words carried steel, her dark eyes flicking to the window where the night pressed in, alive with unseen threats. Hawk folded the map with a snap, his cap shadowing the lines etched deep on his face. Outpost chatters lighting up their network. Cleanup crews mobilizing. 3 rigs confirmed, heading this way to seal loose ends. We move at first light, convoy tight. Ghost scouts ahead. Iron, you and Lena ride center with the kid. His plan was a web of precision, born from foxholes and forgotten runs, each detail a thread of loyalty pulling them forward. Ghost nodded, holstering his sidearm with a soft click, the bruise on his jaw fading to a dull shadow. "They'll expect a straight shot to the highway. I'll lay false trails in the arroyos, buy us hours." The crew's bond thrummed unspoken, a family forged not by blood but by oaths whispered over campfires, now tested in the crucible of this pursuit. As the lantern burned low, Lena shared fragments of her captivity, the outpost's sterile isolation, guards' veiled threats masked as procedure, the falsified hold that pinned her like a butterfly under glass. "They wanted the full ledger I hid," she said, voice steadying with each revelation. Recordings of the foreman haggling loads, tech rerouted to shadows, payoffs to badges keeping the routes clear. "I flagged it all, but the system swallowed my report. Thought I'd vanish like the others." Her hand found Eliza's curls, stroking gently, the gesture a quiet defiance against the fear that had stolen her days. Jack listened, the pieces slotting into place. Haulage's empire built on quiet corruption, justice eroded by greased palms, a moral decay that Lena had dared to expose. His own regrets echoed in her story. The brother lost to betrayal he'd ignored, the promise he'd abandoned for solitary roads. Stepping back in meant facing that mirror, redemption carved from action, not apology. Dawn broke with a hesitant blush, painting the way station's walls in soft rose and amber, the air crisp with the promise of motion. The crew mounted up outside, engines coughing to life in a staggered roar that scattered the night's chill. Jack secured Eliza in the sidecar, her face alight with the thrill of reunion, while Lena settled behind him, arms wrapping firm around his waist, the scarf fluttering like a banner. The convoy formed, a steel serpent winding through the scrub, dust rising in veils that masked their path. Hawk led, his Softail cutting the lead, GPS locked on the judge's neutral drop point, a remote ranger station, far from haulage's tendrils. The Badlands unfolded in relentless waves, mesas looming like silent judges, the sun climbing to bake the earth into shimmering mirages. Ghost peeled off early, vanishing into a side canyon with a nod, his bike's growl fading into echoes. Tension coiled with each mile, distant engines humming on the wind, shadows that might be rigs or tricks of light. Lena's breath warmed Jack's back, her voice cutting through the roar. "Why'd you give it to me that day, a stranger in the dust?" Jack's grip tightened on the handlebars, the vibration syncing with his pulse. "Saw myself in you, stranded fighting alone. The medallion was my word, iron promise code, meant to ride for folks like that, failed you by forgetting." Her silence spoke volumes then. "You didn't fail, you're here now. That's the honor." A crackle in Hawk's radio shattered the rhythm. Ghost's voice taut. "Tails confirmed, 2 ahead, 1 flanking east. Hitting the arroyos now." The convoy surged, weaving into the labyrinth of dry riverbeds, tires kicking red earth that choked the air. Engines screamed as they dodged boulders, the sidecar bouncing with Eliza's wide-eyed grip on the edge. Bullets whined from afar, pinging off rock faces, but the iron promise danced the line, evasive turns, flares bursting to blind pursuers. Forge laid covering fire from her mount, sparks blooming like defiant stars, drawing the hounds into Ghost's trap, a narrow choke point rigged with loose gravel and false drops. The lead rig fish-tailed into the snare, slamming to a halt in a plume of dust, its driver cursing as chains from Silas's earlier prep snagged the undercarriage. The crew didn't stop, didn't engage, just pressed on, the evidence pouch strapped tight to Hawk's tank. Miles later, the ranger station emerged from the haze, a squat adobe outpost with a flag limp in the still air. The judge waited in the shade of a lone cottonwood, briefcase in hand, his face a mask of stern integrity untouched by the rot. Hawk dismounted first, handing over the bundle. Photos, drives, Lena's testimony scrawled in haste. "This unmasks the chain," Hawk said, voice low. "Payoffs from haulage to PD, reroutes to Black Ops, whistleblowers proof, clean." The judge nodded, eyes scanning the horizon where dust settled like fading threats. "I'll route it federal. Bypass the locals. You've stirred the nest, expect backlash." Lena stepped forward, Eliza at her side, the medallion glinting in the sun. "For the disappeared," she added, her voice a quiet thunder. Jack watched the weight of the moment settling, justice not in fists, but in truths laid bare, corruption's veil torn by loyalty's hand. The crew remounted, the drop complete, but the road hummed with unfinished edges, the cleanup crew regrouping, shadows lengthening toward a final stand. As they rode out, the Badlands whispering secrets in the wind, Jack felt the shift deepen. Lena's presence behind him was no burden, a partner in the fray, her resilience mirroring his own scarred resolve. Eliza's laughter cut the air, a sound pure as desert rain, binding them tighter. The promise pulsed alive, redemption unfolding in the miles, a legacy of honor against the cynical tide. But ahead, the web quivered one last time, demanding the crew's full measure, sacrifice for the light it would cast. The sun dipped toward the horizon like a spent cartridge, bleeding crimson across the Badlands as the convoy crested a final ridge. The ranger station shrank in the mirrors, a distant sentinel swallowed by dust, but the weight of the delivered proof lingered, a spark tossed into corruption's dry tinder. Jack's Harley led the pack, Lena's arms steady around his waist, her breath sinking with the engine's pulse. while Eliza rode secure in the sidecar, her fingers tracing the Medallion's edges with a quiet wonder. The crew flanked tight, Hawk's Softail humming left, Forge's bike a shadow right, Ghost trailing with eyes peeled for the cleanup crew's inevitable rebound. The air whipped sharp, carrying the mineral tang of cooling earth and the faint, lingering bite of gunpowder from the Arroyo evasion. Word from the judge had crackled through Hawk's radio mid-ride. Federal eyes opening, haulage's web unraveling from the top, foreman detained, ledgers seized in a dawn raid 2 counties over, but loose ends snapped like frayed ropes. The cleanup crew, those unmarked shadows from the east, wouldn't fade quietly. Silas's voice cut in next, gravelly over the static. Rigs spotted inbound. 3, heavy, cutting off the southern pass. Hole up at Echo Canyon. It's defensible. Jack nodded into the wind, the scar at his eye pulling taut. Echo Canyon, a natural fortress of sheer walls and narrow mouths where the Iron Promise had once cached supplies during a long-ago run. Fitting ground for a last stand, not of bullets, but of the unyielding code that bound them. The canyon swallowed them whole as twilight deepened, engines echoing off red rock like thunder in a bottle. They dismounted in the basin, the air cooling to a hush, broken only by the drip of hidden springs and the soft jingle of gear unpacked. Lena helped Eliza down, mother and daughter sharing a glance heavy with unspoken survival, the scarf now knotted around the girl's wrist like a talisman. Jack scanned the rims, the vastness amplifying the crew's quiet efficiency, Hawk rigging tripwires with thin lines, Ghost positioning overlooks, Forge prepping a medkit amid the boulders. "This ends tonight," Jack said, voice low as the gathering dark. "No more shadows. We face them, show 'em the promise ain't just ink." Lena met his gaze, her bruises fading shadows under the emerging stars, strength etched in the lines of her face. "You gave me that medallion when I needed a stranger's word. Now it's family." The word hung, simple and profound, weaving the crew closer. Veterans who'd shared foxholes, nurses who'd mended fractures, riders who'd chosen loyalty over ease. Eliza clung to her mother's leg, the medallion catching a glint from Hawk's flashlight, its engraving a younger Jack staring back, unbowed by time's scars. In that relic, promises survived, a bridge from desert dust to this canyon vigil, redemption's slow burn igniting full, headlights pierced the night first. Twin beams probing the canyon mouth like wary predators. Engines growled to a halt outside, doors creaking open, boots crunching gravel. 5 figures emerging, silhouettes bulked with vests and rifles, the cleanup crew's final card. No badges, no bluster, just the cold efficiency of men paid to erase. Their leader stepped forward, voice amplified by the walls. "Hand over the woman and the kid. Walk away clean, or we bury the lot." Jack stood at the forefront, crew arrayed behind like a wall of leather and resolve. Eliza shielded in the center with Lena's arm around her. The wind carried the scent of their oiled weapons, a stark counter to the canyon's ancient quiet. "We ride for the stranded," Jack called back, his tone steady as canyon stone. The medallion now pinned to his vest like a badge. "Lena's proof is out. Feds have the manifests, the payoffs. Your web's done." A pause stretched, tension coiling like a spring, the leader's laugh brittle against the rock. Shots cracked the air then, not aimed to kill but to flush, bullets ricocheting off walls, sparks blooming in the dark. The crew moved as one, Ghost's flares arcing high, blinding the intruders. Hawk's wires tripping the lead man into the dust, Forge's voice a calm anchor, guiding Eliza's ears away from the chaos. Jack advanced through the smoke, not charging but closing the gap with deliberate steps. Lena at his side, her chin lifted in defiance. The leader rose, rifle swinging, but Jack's presence loomed, a tower of scarred honor, the Iron Promise patch gleaming faintly. "It's over," Jack said, close enough to see the flicker of doubt in the man's eyes. "Drop it. Justice ain't yours to bury." No fists flew, no blood spilled in graphic sprays. The standoff broke with the leader's rifle lowering, hands rising slow, the crew's unyielding line, a moral force stronger than lead. Surrender rippled through them, radios buzzing with federal intercepts closing in, Haulage's empire crumbling under the weight of exposed truths. The cleanup crew knelt, zip-tied by Ghost's quick hands, their threat dissolving into the night's embrace. As sirens wailed distant, heralding the authorities uncorrupted by the rot, the canyon exhaled. Lena pulled Jack into a brief embrace, her whisper lost in the wind. The promise held. Eliza ran to him, small arms hugging his leg, the medallion pressing cool against his knee. A circle complete, from forgotten oath to family forged. The crew gathered the surrendered, evidence of the night's moral victory, while dawn's first light crested the rims, gilding the rock in gold. Hawk clapped Jack's shoulder. Forge smiled through the dust. Ghost holstered his piece with a nod. They weren't heroes of flash. They were the quiet guardians, loyalty's engine outlasting corruption's whine. The ride back unfolded under a sky clearing to blue, the convoy lighter now, bonds tempered in the canyon's fire. Lena rode with Jack, Eliza chattering between them, the scarf fluttering free. Redstone faded in the mirrors. The safe house a waypoint to new horizons, Lena's testimony sealed, Haulage's chains broken, justice a poetic tide washing clean the Badlands' stains. Jack felt the scars ease, not erased, but honored. The medallion returned to Lena's neck as a shared legacy. Promises deferred had bloomed into redemption, family chosen in the roar of engines and the hush of vows kept. The road stretched endless, but no longer lonely, a path of quiet courage, where honor's legacy rode on 1 mile into the light. Thank you for joining this journey. If these tales of iron promises resonate with you, subscribe for more chapters of redemption on the open road.